Okay, I think we probably ought to get things moving. So I'll simply invite Dr. Sebastian Kolditz to come forward, please, up to the execution block, and prepared to give his paper. Dr. Kolditz is currently in Berlin at the Academy of Sciences, and he's working on a project to do, I think, with Charles IV, the emperor of the mid-14th century. He's best known, I think, probably for many things, but particularly for his authoritative work and major work on the Council of Basel. Well, I'm delighted that we've managed to persuade him to come back to the 15th century from the 14th and to talk to us about the right century. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, for this introduction. Thank you, Darius, and all who organized this conference for inviting me to speak here. And I must admit that it is a new topic for me, so there will be something of work in progress, which I can give you now. In the well-established master narrative regarding the establishment of ecclesiastical union between Greeks and Latins in the course of the 15th century, Lithuania and Poland, the two constituents, as you see here, of a very loose but vast, geographically vast territorial unit, state in Central Eastern Europe, usually don't play a significant role, if they appear at all in these discussions. And yet, it is clear that these entities would necessarily be strongly affected by any such attempt, as both of them included substantial territories belonging to the space that the Byzantines continued to call Rossiya, the mass of lands once ruled by the branches of the Rurikid family, with an Orthodox population adhering to the Greek rite and belonging traditionally as one ecclesiastical province, as we heard, to the obedience of the Patriarchate of Constantinople. The last quarter of the 14th century witnessed the firm establishment of two cousins from among the many members of the Gediminid clan as uncontested rulers in this space for a long time. First among them, Jagiello, who in 1386 won the Polish crown by marriage to Queen Jadwiga and was known as Władysław II Jagiello, and who always kept his hereditary right to the Lithuanian territories, at least as a princeps supremus. And Vytautas, who after a rather serpentine path to power managed to concentrate effective rulership over Lithuania firmly in his hands under the title of Magnus Dux, corresponding to traditional Russian Veliki Knyaz and German Großfürst. In the course of these events, both had converted from their traditional religion to Latin Christianity, though Vytautas had also once received an Orthodox baptism. And if he did not retain this faith, he at least kept the name given to him at this occasion, namely the auspicious name of Alexander. Both of them proved to be exceptionally long-lived. Jagiello lived until 1434, and Vytautas died only 4 years earlier. My aim in this paper is rather simple. It consists in trying to understand in which ways, if at all, these two powerful rulers gave some impact to church union dynamics in the first third of the 15th century, marked by two important conciliar assemblies, that of Constance and that of Basel, both as steps towards the Union of Florence. And before going into details, one general remark might be appropriate. We must be aware of a major shift in the nature of extant sources in the time around 1400. The still extant manuscripts of the famous Register of the Patriarchate of Constantinople that allow us to study the ecclesiastical relations for the 14th century in much detail, they break just off shortly after 1400, and nothing similar has come down to us for the first half of the 15th century. And the change is even more dramatic since the Byzantine perspective seems to vanish completely. taking the Prosopographisches Lexikon der Paläologenzeit as an indicator, there's only one explicit reference to Vytautas in a late Byzantine Greek source, namely a short chronographical note from Mount Athos on the death of Vasily I of Muscovy, or Megas Rigas, in 1425, where this occasion is also called son-in-law of Vytautas, as you see here. Instead, none of Vytautas' deeds has found a repercussion in the Byzantine sources, as far as we see. Jagiello does not even appear in the PLP, but perhaps wrongly so, as there is one Byzantine source explicitly referring to him, namely a letter sent to him by Patriarch Anthony IV early in 1397, in which he is addressed as Kralis ke Afthendis pasis polzis Litvorosias Parathalasias ke Alon Polon Topon, meaning a king of Poland. So this is a short addition to the paper Professor Malinowski gave today, because there's another way to call Poland in this time. Besides that, we must completely rely on sources of either Russian or Western provenance, written in Slavonic or Latin and German languages respectively. The range of such sources, however, increases considerably from the years around 1400 onwards, especially with regard to the previously often scarce documentary records. The sheer mass of individual letters collected in the so-called Codex Epistolaris Vitoldi is an impressive testimony in this respect. But again, there's a question of perspective. Most of the available information, at least for Lithuania, comes from the rich archives of the Teutonic Order, the Ordensbriefarchiv, OBA. Of course, there are many letters written by Vytautas himself in this material, but the primary concern, the perspective, so to say, is always the questions concerning the order and the territorial relations between Lithuania and the order. And this is, of course, not the same as having some material concerning the, let me say, Ruthenian politics of Vytautas, which we do not have in this way. For questions concerning the eastern part of the Lithuanian territory, we are thus much more dependent on the Ruthenian annalistic tradition, on the Letopisi, both that of the territories ruled by the Grand Dukes of Lithuania and that of Muscovy, and on some ecclesiastical documents transmitted independently. But all this often from a later time, and this, of course, poses some other critical problems. Finally, sources of properly Polish origin must also be mentioned. On the one hand, Jan Długor's Great Chronicle, composed some decades after the events we are concerned with, and on the other hand, the document collection drawn up by Stanisław Człowiek, future Bishop of Poznan, who during his years as a member of the Polish Royal Chancery collected this material, and this is a source of primary importance in some respects. To sum up, for the study of Byzantine Polish-Lithuanian relations in the 15th century, we depend on a mass of fragmentary, often one-sided evidence completely different from that of the previous century. And still a last short remark on research. There would be many names should be mentioned. I just want to limit it to some short contributions here. Oskar Halecki's concise outline of Polish-Byzantine relations and Raymond-Joseph Löhner's study on the brothers Chrysoberges are two classical works concerning this issue, both from the 30s of the last century. Then we have Kurt Fosterreuter's article on the Teutonic Order, the question of church union at the time of the Basilienses, so at the end of the period, I'm interested here. And many others have, of course, made essential contributions to our subject, just to mention Darius Barona's recent article and that of Dan Ioan Mureșan, who some years ago drew attention to the important role of the Hungarian and later on also Roman king Sigismund of Luxembourg as an interlocutor of the late Paleologan emperors. And now, medias in res. The opening years of the 15th century marked the end of the long-lasting pontificate of Cyprian as Metropolitan of Kyiv. Although initially installed only for the Lithuanian parts of Russia, he managed to be accepted finally also in Muscovy, and after the death of his rival Pimin in 1389, he was the only remaining metropolitan for the whole space of Russia. One of his visits to the western part of his enormous church province in 1396 gave occasion to a personal encounter with King Jagiello, who seemingly committed Cyprian to support his own proposal, namely a proposal for the realization of church union by means of a council to be assembled in his Polish territories, an idea he also submitted to the Ecumenical Patriarchate in 1396, and which provoked the above-mentioned very, very hesitant reply by Patriarch Anthony IV in the following year. It remained thus an episode without any consequence, as Jagiello probably had not yet understood what kind of council the Greek Church deemed necessary for any step towards church union, namely an ecumenical council. An ecumenical council had certain preconditions. After that, King Jagiello disappears for nearly more than a decade from the records of the Byzantine foreign political relations. Though these years are marked by the heyday of diplomatic activities of Manuel II and his closest collaborators, as Jonathan Shepard has mentioned yesterday, for instance, Manuel Chrysogoras. They organized substantial Latin aid for Byzantium from all over Europe, but Poland is absent from these records. Halecki suggested that this significant absence was due to Polish-Lithuanian preoccupation with the Teutonic Order before the Battle of Grunwald in 1410. Such a focalizing effect seems indeed to exist for the years 1409 to 1411, but barely in a very, very long run. And besides that, this is all certainly not the case for Vytautas, whose political agenda was instead focused on the eastern part of his territory in the years around 1400. Having suffered the terrible defeat by the Tatars at the Vorskla River in 1399, he nevertheless preserved his authority in Ruthenia and crowned his subsequent military achievements with the conquest of Smolensk in 1404, followed by some treaties with the Prince of Muscovy in the following years. And it's about this time that our protagonist Cyprian died. According to the custom, his successor had to be named by the Patriarch and the Synod in Constantinople, which only happened, however, in 1408, when the Greek monk Photius from Monemvasia was ordained, perhaps in the presence of Emperor Manuel II. At Easter 1410, Photius finally reached Moscow, the well-established residence of the Metropolitans, of course, after having paid a customary visit to the ancient see of Kyiv. The long vacancy of the Metropolitan See could, of course, have some detrimental effects on the rights and properties. And this should later serve as an argument for Vytautas to reject the legitimacy of Photius at all and to have another Metropolitan installed for his own territories in 1450. If we accept the Grand Duke's argumentation, however, he at least initially did not aim at the division of the huge metropolis and the creation of a separate ecclesiastical space for Lithuanian Russia, but instead he claims that he had sent his own candidate for the Metropolitan See, namely a Bishop Theodosius of Polotsk, to Byzantium after Cyprian's death, and that he had asked the Emperor and the Patriarch to install this Theodosius as an indigenous man on the See of Kyiv. But Emperor and Patriarch ignored his request and sent instead their own Metropolitan, Svoyevo Metropolita, Photius, whom Vytautas in turn could not accept. This did not yet mean open schism, as Vytautas concedes that he would have changed, or perhaps even changed his mind, if only Photius would have chosen to stay at Kyiv and care about the administration of his church, which the latter, in his eyes at least, did not do. The continuation of the crisis will soon occupy us, but first we have to enlarge the picture. 1410, Sigismund of Hungary, who aimed at obtaining the royal crown of the Holy Roman Empire at this time, had thoroughly taken the side of the Teutonic Order in the latter's war and conflict against the Polish crown. He cautiously abstained from an invasion of Poland, but he was the firm ally of the order. Of course, after the Peace of Torun, this meant that he had to repair his former contacts, his former relations to Poland and Lithuania. And this was the occasion for the meeting finally held at Lublau in March 1412. This meeting and the ensuing long visit of King Jagiello to Hungary, in the course of which, inter alia, the Polish crown jewels were restituted to Jagiello, was a great success. In a letter destined to the English King Henry, Sigismund wrote that he and Jagiello were now united by the Holy Spirit for the general welfare, generali bono, of the Christian faith, of the Roman Church and the Roman Empire, since peace had been established between the two kingdoms, and their peoples and the two kings had united themselves in brotherhood, and now against the pagans and infidels. The latter statement, in fact, is an allusion, and not the only one in the letter, to a common project of a crusade the two kings had agreed upon. Although the Holy Land was mentioned as its ultimate destination, its closer aim was a campaign against the Ottoman Turks. And this is outlined in more detail in another letter the two kings in common sent to Emperor Manuel II, whom they invited to join their alliance, alluding to Manuel's long experience with the Turkish threat. You see it here. Vos si placet in predicte fraternitatis nostre participium gratanta associare, vobis enim tamquam magis experto, notiores sunt vie modi et ordo qualita melius procedi posset contra turcos predictos. He knew the ways, the ways also in a metaphorical sense to lead such a campaign against the Turks. In the second part, the king's letter picks up also the subject of church union. Both the two kings claim to have heard that the emperor was eager to unite the Greek church with the Roman church, and in this respect, Sigismund alone refers to his previous contacts to Pope John the 23rd for the preparation of a future general council as an opportunity to achieve this very aim of church union. Well, this is only an illusion. And in the end, I would doubt whether Vladislav Jagiello indeed was the driving force behind all these plans of rapprochement with Byzantium and alliance against the Ottomans. The whole ambitious project is much more Sigismundian in conception, and the Hungarian king would also primarily have profited from its realization. Vytautas seemingly remained apart from all these plans, though already in April 1412 he declared his adherence to the conventions, to the peace conventions agreed upon between Jagiello and Sigismund. Be all that as it may, the letter to Manuel naturally implied a renewed direct contact between Jagiello and Emperor Manuel II. Whether it led to an immediate response or to continuing embassies is not known. But at least in 1415, a Byzantine envoy appears at the Polish scene. According to Jan Długosz, already in the springtime of this year, Nuntii Patriarchiae Imperatoris Graecorum came to Jagiello. They mentioned a shortage of grain in Constantinople due to the city's oppression by the Turks, and the king consequently had the requested quantity of supplies sent by sea from a Black Sea port. Klaus-Peter Matschke has drawn attention to the fact that Manuel II at that time already stayed at the Peloponnese, where he had the Hexamelian Wall rebuilt against the Ottomans. The capital was thus administered by his eldest son, John VIII, who thus might have been the actual sender of the emissaries, in conjunction, of course, with the Patriarch. And the latter's participation must not necessarily indicate that church union was a topic in this mission. Instead, the Patriarch could either have exercised a sort of co-regency with the young emperor, or he might participate as a promoter of social peace in Constantinople, as patriarchs at least sometimes did in late Byzantine times, in times of acute famine. John VIII, however, disposed already of a special relationship with the Gediminids. In the years before, he had been married to Anna, the daughter of Vasily of Muscovy, and his wife Sophia, who in turn was Vytautas' daughter. And it seems that the Lithuanian Grand Duke had played a formidable role in arranging the imperial marriage of his granddaughter. The Byzantine mission mentioned by Długosz was not the only Byzantine contact towards Poland-Lithuania in 1450. On August the 29th, King Jagiello and Vytautas, both of them, issued a letter of recommendation for Theodoros Chrysoberges, a Byzantine convert to the Latin faith, Dominican friar and vicarius generalis of the so-called Societas Fratrum Peregrinatium, which organized Dominican missionary activities around the Black Sea. This time, however, Chrysoberges went westward in order to participate at the Council of Constance and to promote the Reductio Graecorum there. Jagiello's support to such projects was certainly sincere, the more so as it gave him a welcome argument against the defamations constantly spread by the Teutonic Order at the Council against Poland. The Paleologan emperors, on the other hand, kept always a certain degree of distance towards the activities of converts like the Chrysoberge brothers, who could rather provoke alienation than sympathy for church union in the Patriarchate or in the Society of Byzantium. But our picture for the year 1415 is still incomplete. As already mentioned, Vytautas had strongly opposed the new Metropolitan Photius of Kyiv, and this conflict escalated in the end of 1415 too. The previous events are not absolutely clear. Muriel Happel once followed the narration contained in Nikonovskaya letopis from the mid-16th century, which contains many details which are not yet present in another important text, namely the proclamation Vytautas himself gave at his synod, which he convoked in 1415 to proceed to this election. The complete authenticity of the letter of this letter's Slavonic text, meaning the text of the proclamation, is also a matter of doubt. We have only relatively late testimonies there, and the Latin translation, which also exists, could have been something produced only in the early modern period. That's all a bit difficult. Nevertheless, I will simply refer to the main aspects of the course of events as given in this proclamation, which usually does not contain precise dates. So, at some time after 1410, Vytautas sought the counsel of his brothers, the Rusian princes, to whom he proposed Grigory Zamblak, the nephew of late Cyprian, as his new candidate, the second after Theodosius of Polotsk, for the metropolitan's post. The ruler justified his step with reproaches against the crimes Photius had committed. And only the Latin version specifies this in a very clear sense, namely that he had held long and allegedly repeated absence abroad, especially in Greece, more than his predecessors had done. Grigori was sent to Constantinople to be ordained, but he was denied by the Byzantine authorities. Vytautas concludes maliciously that the Byzantine authorities not only installed whom they wanted, but that they did so for money, an open reproach for simony. By contrast, the Grand Duke claimed for himself to be guided by most honorable motives. He cared for the needs of a church that did not represent his own faith, but that was threatened by total destruction, according to his claims, namely the metropolis of Kyiv. And so, nobody should later blame him for having tolerated that such another faith could suffer decline in his principality. The Orthodox bishops, whom Vytautas had already assembled for the first time at that moment, confirmed his assessment of Photius' crimes, and they furthermore backed the prince's demand by claiming that at least once in the past, a Rusian episcopal synod had already elected a metropolitan without recourse to Byzantium. Vytautas, however, did not yet follow this path. He sent again a delegation to Zagreb for the third time, and I think this is not without relevance that 3 times people are sent there in March 1415. If this initiative would again remain inconclusive, and we must conclude it remained inconclusive, the local election should take place. It was determined to St. Elias Day, this is the 20th of July, and later on, two Greek ambassadors arrived from Muscovy, one of them a member of the Disipatos family, a very well-known family in late Byzantine foreign relations, and they begged Vytautas to postpone the date and the deadline he had mentioned so that they could explain the urgency of the matter to the emperor. Vytautas agreed, but in vain. Nothing happened, and finally the local synod was convened, came together on the 15th of November 1415 at Novogrudek, and finally elected Gregory Zamblak as Metropolitan for the See of Kyiv. Vytautas himself encouraged them in his proclamation. Your faith should not be reduced, and your church may be strong. And he also invoked the honor of the Russia in total. The Patriarchate, of course, had no choice but to excommunicate Zamblak, and when Patriarch Euthymius died in 1416, his successor, Joseph II, confirmed the punitive measures against the de facto Lithuanian metropolitan. To sum up, the year 1415 certainly witnessed a high density of communications between the Bosporus and the Polish-Lithuanian Union, more than any other year in the period discussed in this paper. But besides that, the picture is quite contradictory. Political rapprochement combined with an escalating ecclesiastical conflict. Unfortunately, we cannot follow these traces into the subsequent years based on the excellent sources because we have no detailed information. Gregory Zamblak's visit to the Council of Constance in the final days of this council in 1418 is too well known to be discussed here again in detail. His delegation aroused much attention not only with the members of the ecclesiastical body, but also in the local population, so that public attendance to the religious ceremonies, as they are here displayed in a very, very late idea or vision of this event, the attendance by the local population had to be prohibited by the municipal authorities. Zamblak was received by the newly elected Pope Martin V and expressed his desire for church union in a speech, but in the end, his appearance remained once again an episode. Peter of Wormdit, the representative of the Teutonic Order, mentioned Zamblak's mission only in passing. For him, it was an obstacle. You see it there, the fourth line. Dokam ein Hindernisse, darin von dem russischen Erzbischof Metropolit. So it was the reaction of the Teutonic Order. Something happened which was not planned for their projects at the council. It is still an open question whether Zamblak could act as a representative of the Byzantine Church, of the Patriarchate. Recent research tends to believe that this was the case and that Zamblak was reconciled with the Patriarchate and his excommunication had been reversed. Such assumptions are, however, based on rather weak evidence. There is no explicit statement that such a reconciliation ever happened. Only our source, Riechenthal, claims that he was also a representative of the Patriarchate. But if you know many of the legends, Riechenthal tells about especially the world, and as the world is divided into various regions, you will have some doubt whether this is a good base for such an assumption. Zamblak could thus perhaps only speak in the name of the Orthodox Church of Lithuanian Ruthenia, backed by Vytautas' authority and that of King Jagiello as well. Because on the 1st January of 1418, Jagiello, then present at Vilnius, addressed his letter to Pope Martin V, which also served as a letter of recommendation for Zamblak, whom Vytautas and the king himself had chosen to foster the reductio of the numerous people sub ritu Grecorum living under their rule. The royal initiative, occasioned by the news of Martin's election, is thus evident behind Zamblak's mission to Constance. Zamblak's life ended soon after his departure from Constance. Some Russian letopici, among them the Nikonovskaya, mention his death under the year 1490. In August 1420, Byzantine envoys were again present at Krakow as the accounts of the royal household state. This information is usually connected with an undated letter in Stanislav Czovek's Chancery collection, which the king addressed to Emperor Manuel II, his consanguineus carissimus. In this case, the letter gives the envoy's surname as Phil Andropenos, we have to add, who is qualified as a Miles and Auricus, and whose mission it was to assure that the Basileus wished church union. Certainly, however, not, as here mentioned in Jagiello's text, as a reductio of his people to the unity of the Roman Church. Jagiello thus exhorted Manuel to pursue this way to its very effect. The desire of all Christians to defend Byzantium would become more ardent and firmer if the emperor would finally obtain church union. To put it short, a non-committal general statement which does not really inform us about the concrete aims of the embassy and whether they found Jagiello's sympathy. Following Halecki, we might assume that Philanthropenos, if he is indeed identical with the legate Manuel Philanthropenos present at Venice in January of the same year, should convince the king to serve as a mediator between Venice and Sigismund in order to settle the main conflict that impeded effective Latin aid for Byzantium between those two powers. But this is no more than a conjecture. The letter shows above all that the desire for church union was in fact a commonplace in Western political relations with Byzantium, and perhaps it is more significant that Jagiello's reply in this case did not link the needs of his own Orthodox subjects to this matter as he had previously done in the letter recommending Zamblak. In this case, the Byzantine envoy is also attested, however, in Lithuania at Vytautas' court. The Zubralskaya letopis, one of the Belarusian chronicles, states that the Metropolitan Photius came to Lithuania on the 1st of June in 6928 and met Vytautas at Novogrodok, obviously after the death of Zamblak. And the place of this meeting is not without symbolic relevance. It had been the place where Zamblak had once been chosen. There was then also the emperor's envoy, Philanthropon, the Grecian. If the various splinters of information really fit together, then it is inevitable to conclude that Philanthropenos visited first Vytautas and only afterwards went to Poland. And then we might hypothesize that the most important aim of his mission was to arrange peace, but not peace towards the Latins, but peace within the Orthodox world and the Church of Russia by establishing cordial relations between Photius and Vytautas. At the same time, the Byzantine emperor and patriarch thus assured that any initiative concerning the crucial issue of church union remained under their power and agency. Zamblak's appearance at Constance thus might have not passed unnoticed in Constantinople, and might have been something which alerted the Byzantine authorities that other players grasped the very trump they had, namely church union as the main way to organize help for Byzantium in the late centuries. So at this point, I think this is the main part of the analysis already existing. I would continue, and I do this in the written form for the 1420s, and there are some other important events, just only to mention it briefly. There are a series of royal encounters in 1423, 1424, not only implying Sigismund again and Poland and Lithuania, but also the King of Denmark, and finally also the Byzantine Emperor. As you see here, there's a meeting of three kings, in this case Sigismund, John VIII, and Eric of Denmark, and they try to form something like an alliance. Yeah? How does this relate to Poland and Lithuania? At least we know that at this meeting also some people from the court of Jagiello were present, and we have again a letter of a humanist, well-known humanist, Francesco Filelfo, written much later, but who remembers his own past when he was a legate of the emperor, of the Byzantine emperor. He stayed at Constantinople at that time, and was sent to the West, was sent to the court of Sigismund, but also attended an event at Krakow, namely the coronation of Queen Sophia in 1424, early in 1424, and even gave the oration at this occasion, the official oration, which means that there is some Byzantine effect at the meeting at Krakow too. So how does all this relate is another question I want to discuss later, as well as this letter from Vytautas to Sigismund, with which I will finish the talk now. It's also a letter which cannot be dated certainly, but it must be in the years around or before 1426. And what is important from it, we know that there were continuous contacts between Vytautas and as well the Turks, as well as the Byzantines, but these contacts stopped at a certain point, and this is related to the alliance which had been concluded with Sigismund, Confederationis Fraternae inter vestrum serenitatem dominum regem Poloniae et nos. So at 1423, perhaps, these continuous lines of communication were finished, and there is at least a gap. So this very general information can serve us to trace at least somehow the degree of communication between Lithuania and Byzantium in these 14-20 years, where explicit references are very, very rare. Thank you for your attention.
Well, thank you, Dr. Kolditz, for presenting a very complicated interplay between various interests so clearly, and I think pointing your finger particularly at the year 1415 as of particular significance. I think there probably are one or two questions to ask, but I suggest that we leave those for the moment, and I'll ask our next speaker, please, to come forward. The Reverend Nazar Zatorskyy is going to speak to us, and you're based at the moment in Switzerland, I think it is, isn't it, at the University of Fribourg, you teach. So perhaps it's a good idea to read out your title, because it's quite a long one. Would you like to do this, or shall? Oh, it's up there, so we don't really need. Yes. Okay. Well, you can read for yourselves. So, over to you, Nazar.
Thank you. Thank you for invitation to this conference and for the possibility to speak in front of such an eloquent circle of scientists. In this presentation, I would like to refine or correct two theses in the historiography of the Kyiv Metropolitanate in the post-Florentine period. The first thesis to be refined concerns the final division of the Kyiv Metropolitanate after the Union of Florence, which my highly esteemed doctoral supervisor Igor Skochelas and his co-author Andrzej Gil in their joint monography called The Great Division. This relates to the second thesis concerning the emergence of the Metropolitanate of Moscow as a result of this division. Let us begin with the changes in church policy in the Metropolitanate of Kyiv after the Union of Florence, which can be best traced through the historical development. The transfer of the Metropolitan See from Kyiv to Vladimir on Klязьма in 1299 by Metropolitan Maximus reinforced the strong centrifugal tendencies that had long prevailed in the political sphere. This led to the foundation of new ecclesiastical provinces that were partially extracted from the body of the Kyiv Metropolitanate. In 1303, the Metropolitanate of Halych was founded on the territory of the of the Kingdom of Rus. In the years 1315, 1317, the Metropolitanate of Lithuania was established. Both metropolitanates were approved by the Byzantine Emperor and the Patriarch of Constantinople, at the request, of course, of the respective local monarch. However, Constantinople was reluctant to split up what was until one metropolitanate. The new foundations were repeatedly liquidated de facto or de jure, and their territory was joined to the original metropolitanate of all Rus and placed under the pastoral authority of the metropolitan, who was residing now in the north. The respective monarchs of Poland and Lithuania also adapted to this trend, sometimes fighting to maintain their separate metropolitanates, sometimes trying to impose their own candidate for the metropolitan see of all Rus. If they did not succeed in their strives, they sometimes refused to recognize the rights of the rival metropolitan and instead insisted on the legitimacy of their own metropolitan. Let us look at how this process reflected in the biographies of the respective metropolitans. Metropolitan Maximus transferred his see from Kyiv to Vladimir on Klязьма in 1299, and while he was still alive, the Metropolitanate of Halyč was established in 1303. In 1325, his successor Peter of Rata transferred the Metropolitan see from Vladimir on Klязьма to Moscow. During his lifetime, the Metropolitanate of Lithuania was established. After him, Theognostas was the Metropolitan of Kyiv, who was fighting against the renewed Metropolitanate of Halyč, led by Gabriel and Theodore subsequently, until it was liquidated. During the lifetime of the Metropolitan Alexei Biakon, successor of Theognostas, Anthony was head of the renewed Metropolitanate of Halyč, and Cyprian was sent to Constantinople and consecrated Metropolitan of Lithuania with the rights to succeed the see of Metropolitan of all Rus. Cyprian's authority as Metropolitan of all Rus was also not without controversy. Pimen repeatedly emerged as his rival in Moscow, while Anthony had held office as Metropolitan of Halyč until 1391. Cyprian's successor Photius was not popular in Lithuania, where Gregory Tsamblak served as Metropolitan for a time, although condemned and rejected by Constantinople. Only Gerasimus had no rival, but this is probably only due to the fact that he was in office for less than 3 years. Metropolitan Isidore was arrested in Moscow after the Union of Florence and had to flee. After all, Jonah was elected Metropolitan during the Isidore's lifetime in 1448, and in 1451 he was recognized both in the Kingdom of Poland and in the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. But as early as 1458, while Jonah was still alive, Gregory the Bulgarian was sent from Rome as Metropolitan of Kyiv and all Rus. He was recognized in Poland, Lithuania, and tried to extend his authority in northern territories as well, albeit without success. According to Gil and Skochilas, in the following years, both sides, Kyiv and Moscow, sought support in Constantinople and persistently attempted to extend their sovereignty over the neighbor's land. However, these efforts were not crowned with success. Thus, the division of the Orthodox Church of Rus into two metropolitanates and simultaneously between two hostile states became a fact from the middle of the 15th century and was finally recognized in 1480. The chosen date of 1480 seems to allude to the death of the elected Metropolitan Misael, who had been in office in Poland and Lithuania until then, although their argumentation, while Gil and Skochilas chose 1480 as the year of the Great Division, is missing in the monography. Misael's successor Simeon was confirmed by the Patriarch of Constantinople and inaugurated in 1481, which was nothing unusual, since also Misael's predecessor Gregory the Bulgarian, had already been confirmed by the Patriarch of Constantinople in 1467 in his office as of Metropolitan of Kyiv and all Rus, including the northern territories. Apart from the date of the Great Division given in the monography, I would like to question the existence of two metropolitanates, that of Kyiv and that of Moscow, mentioned by these prominent scholars. Without doubt, after 1458, there was a separate yes. Yeah, without doubt, after 1458, there was a separate metropolitan in each of the territories, in Poland, Lithuania, and in Muscovy. However, such a situation also existed before, as described and showed above. Did the two separate metropolitanates really exist? Let me clarify the question. We have evidences of the foundation and existence of the Metropolitanate of all Rus, of the Metropolitanate of Halych, and the Metropolitanate of Lithuania. But is there any evidence from the 15th or 16th century of the existence of a Metropolitanate of Moscow? I would like to make a few observations concerning the official documents of that period, which will hopefully shed some light on this question. As Andrei Pliguzo pointed out in his article, the official title of the head of the Kievan Church until the middle of the 14th century was the so-called short title, Metropolitan of all Rus. That means that his jurisdiction covered the entire territory of the Metropolitanate. The longer title, Metropolitan of Kyiv and all Rus, is only attested from 1347 onwards. As can be easily guessed from the development described above, this addition was caused by the emergence of new ecclesiastical provinces on the territory of the Metropolitanate of Rus. The first evidence of the existence of a separate Metropolitanate of Moscow seems to date back to the 15th century. It is found in the well-known Codex Synod 562, which contains the Metropolitan Archive from the 14th century through the first quarter of the 16th century, Metropolici Formularnik. The first mention of a separate Metropolitanate of Moscow is found in the heading of the document number 21, Epistle on the reunion of the Metropolitanate of Kyiv and the Metropolitanate of Moscow. However, there is not a single mention of a Metropolitanate of Moscow in the text of the document. Rather, we read there, "For by the grace of God, the Ruthenian Church was united and restored in the former peace, as it was established according to the ancient custom and law, so that there should be one Metropolitanate in the whole Ruthenian land and one Metropolitan of Kyiv and all Rus." The year of origin of the document, 6922, since the creation of the world, corresponds to the year 1414 AD and points to the time before the union of Florence, namely the time of Metropolitan Photius. That's why the editor of the formulary suggested as a possible date the year of 1420, the time after the death of the Metropolitan Gregory Zamblak, when there was only one Metropolitan of Kyiv, Photius, residing in Moscow. As we see, the one Metropolitanate whose unity was to be restored was that of Kyiv, and the legitimate Metropolitan Photius, who issued this document, did not consider himself as Metropolitan of Moscow, even though he resided there. Moreover, not only in this document, but in all other documents contained in the above-mentioned formulary, Photius does not call himself Metropolitan of Moscow even once, but Metropolitan of Kyiv and all Rus throughout. Therefore, the heading, which refers to the union of the Metropolitanate of Kyiv and Metropolitanate of Moscow, does not correspond to the self-awareness and the title of the incumbent. Another mention of a Metropolitanate of Moscow is found in the post-Florentine document, namely the recognition of the rights of Metropolitan Jonah in the territory of King and Grand Duke Casimir IV in 1451. The heading of the document number 29 says, "Delivery of the Kievan Metropolitanate to the Metropolitan of Moscow by the King." In the document itself, however, there is again not a single word about a Metropolitanate of Moscow or a Metropolitan of Moscow. Rather, it says, "We have loved Metropolitan so and so as our father and have given him the Metropolitan throne of Kyiv and all Rus." In other documents of Jonah, which are contained in the Codex Synod 562, he never applied for himself the title Metropolitan of Moscow, but only Metropolitan of Kyiv and all Rus, or the short title Metropolitan of all Rus. This contradiction between the heading of and the main text of the documents quoted above shows that the headings were added by the later copyists of the Codex Synod 562. It is in the first quarter of the 16th century. They used the term Metropolitanate of Moscow and the title Metropolitan of Moscow separate from a Metropolitanate of Kyiv when describing the divisions or reunions on the Metropolitanate of all Rus, to name its two sub-territories which lay within two hostile states and belong to the same church province, not to describe the creation or existence of a separate church province. Evidence A reference to a Metropolitan of Moscow can also be found in this formulary in two documents from 1516, this time in the main text itself. There are two letters from Athos addressed to the Metropolitan of Moscow, Barlaam, by the heads of the monasteries of Vatopedi and St. Panteleimon. The title of the addressee is mentioned in the inscriptio of both letters. To the most consecrated Metropolitan of Moscow and all Rus, and to the most holy and highly consecrated Metropolitan of Moscow and all Ruthenian lands, Kir Barlaam. It is the first time that this title appears in the main text of a document in the formulary, which brings us again to the first quarter of the 16th century. We encounter a contradictory title in the inscriptio of the accompanying document from 1518, which was given to the emissaries of the Patriarch of Constantinople, Theoleptas I, to Metropolitan Barlaam. It says, to the most consecrated Metropolitan of Kyiv and all Rus. The title is contradictory because it was applied to the metropolitans who resided in Poland, Lithuania, usually, and were confirmed in their office by the Patriarch of Constantinople. At that time, it was Metropolitan Joseph Sultan, confirmed in his office as Metropolitan of Kyiv and all Rus by Theoleptas' predecessor, Patriarch Pachomius, who held, Joseph Sultan, who held this title, Metropolitan of Kyiv and all Rus. No less confusing and contradictory is the signing at the end of this document where it says, "To the most consecrated Metropolitan of Moscow and all Rus." This contradictory title in the same document requires an explanation, which follows shortly. In addition to the Codex Synod 562, another formulary of the Metropolitans residing in Moscow was also examined, namely manuscript number 215 from the Yermolin collection, which contains documents of the Metropolitans Gerontius, Simon, Daniel, and Joasaph, among others. In none of their documents, which are contained in the aforementioned two formularies, does any of them refers to himself as to Metropolitan of Moscow, but only Metropolitan of all Rus. There is therefore a certain discrepancy between the self-designation of the office bearer and his title as used by outsiders. This suggests that the title Metropolitan of Moscow reflects the view of outsiders, while the office bearer continued to see himself as Metropolitan of Kyiv. This could explain the double title in the letter of Patriarch Theoleptos. In the inscriptio, he used the title claimed by the hierarch in Moscow, while in the signing, he used the one that was commonly used for him by the Greeks to distinguish him from the legitimate Metropolitan of Kyiv. In view of the fact that the title Metropolitan of Moscow was not used in any official document of the Moscow Hierarch or the Grand Duke of Moscow, one should have to assume that this title was taken by the copyists of the formulary from the documents addressed to the incumbent from abroad. A threefold conclusion can be drawn from the examination of both formularies. First, the designation Metropolitanate of Moscow and the title Metropolitan of Moscow emerged around the first quarter of the 16th century. Second, they were probably adopted by the scribes of Metropolitan Chancellery from the documents of the foreign clergy. Third, all metropolitans residing in Moscow avoided using this designation and title in their official documents, as it did not correspond to their self-awareness as Metropolitan of Kyiv and all Rus. This self-awareness of the metropolitans residing in Moscow breaks through on special occasions, such as the election of a new holder of this office. This is the description of the election process from 1539 in the formulary Yermolinsky 215. They elected to the Most Holy Metropolitanate of Kyiv and Vladimir and all Rus the Archimandrite Jonah, the hegumen of the monastery of the Trinity Joasaph, the hegumen of the monastery Huteni Novgorod, and sealed and gave to the archbishop, and he, having prayed sufficiently, opened it, and thus nominated as Metropolitan one of these three written names. It should be noted at this point that the archbishop mentioned here, who draws the lot and announces the name of the new Metropolitan, was Macarius of Novgorod, who 3 years later, in 1542, assumed the same office of the Most Holy Metropolitanate of Kyiv and Vladimir and all Rus. The same self-awareness is reflected in the liturgical order of the investiture of the new Metropolitan, in which a special place was assigned to an insignia, namely the pastoral staff or crozier of Metropolitan Peter, who received it from Patriarch Athanasius when he was installed as a Metropolitan of all Rus in Constantinople in 1308. Metropolitan Peter was a constant point of reference for the hierarchs in Moscow, since in 1325 he transferred the Metropolitan See from Vladimir on Klязьма to Moscow. That's why it was repeatedly emphasized that the Metropolitans residing in Moscow were direct successors of Metropolitan Peter and thus metropolitans of all Rus. This insignia was solemnly presented to the Metropolitan after the liturgy during the rite of investiture. He is led to the Metropolitan. Just a minute. Yeah. After the liturgy, Metropolitan is led to the Metropolitan seat in the middle of the church, where he is symbolically set down 3 times. His liturgical vestments are taken off, and he is led to his seat by one of the columns of the cathedral. Arriving at his place, now I'm quoting the Yermolinsky Zbornik, 215. Arriving at this place, the Grand Duke pronounces this speech. May the all-holy and life-giving Trinity, who grants you this episcopal throne and the great metropolitanate of the entire Ruthenian land, guide you and consolidate your episcopate. And the Grand Duke puts the crozier in the hierarch's right hand. This is followed by the chant Is Polite Despota, and Metropolitan rises, takes the crozier, blesses the Tsar. This ritual shows that the newly elected Metropolitan is to take up the same office as his saint predecessor Peter, namely the office of the head of the Metropolitanate of all Rus. At this point, it should be remembered that in the West, the investiture of ecclesiastical dignitaries, abbots and bishops, was also carried out with the crozier and the ring. The right of handing over the crozier to the newly elected Metropolitan by the Grand Duke of Muscovy is therefore nothing other than an investiture for which the same symbol of pastoral power was used, namely the crozier. It is important that the newly elected Metropolitan did not receive any crozier, but that of Metropolitan Peter, to emphasize his succession of the same office of the Metropolitan of all Rus with residence in Moscow. This idea is expressed directly and unmistakably in the inauguration of Metropolitan Athanasius in 1564. During the same rite of inauguration as by Joasaph, the speech pronounced by Tsar Ivan IV at the handing over of the crozier reads as follows: "The Almighty and life-giving Trinity grants you this great high priestly throne of the great wonder-worker Peter, the Metropolitanate of all Rus." These words show that this is the same Metropolitan see held by his predecessor, Metropolitan Peter. Back to the initial question, which needed to be refined. It seems that after the union of Florence and the installation of Metropolitan Gregory the Bulgarian, there was indeed an ecclesiastical division corresponding to the state border between Poland, Lithuania, and the Grand Duchy of Muscovy. However, it was not a new division that can be recorded on a specific date. It means neither 1458 nor 1480. For even in the 16th century, the northern metropolitans were repeatedly referred to and understood as the metropolitans of Kyiv and all Rus, as we could see from their documents and rituals at their election and investiture. From the first quarter of the 16th century onwards, the references to a Metropolitan of Moscow and a Metropolitanate of Moscow were increasing, but according to the self-awareness of the incumbent, he was still the successor to Metropolitan Peter and thus the head of the Metropolitanate of all Rus, which Peter also presided over, including the territories in Poland, Lithuania. However, as he lacked the confirmation of the Patriarch and an incumbent confirmed and recognized by the Patriarch was acting in Poland, Lithuania, hierarchy in Moscow dispensed with a longer title, Metropolitan of Kyiv and all Rus, in his official documents and was content with the short title Metropolitan of all Rus. But at the crucial points, such as the election of the new incumbent, his self-awareness clearly breaks through. And there was no mention of a metropolitan or a metropolitanate of Moscow at any point. That is one of the reasons why the term Metropolitanate of Moscow and the title Metropolitan of Moscow, even for the 16th century, are incorrect and misleading. Another reason is the fact that a separate ecclesiastical province, such as Metropolitanate of Moscow, has never been established, neither by Emperor of Constantinople or Patriarch of Constantinople, nor by the Grand Duke of Moscow. Rather, it was an ecclesiastical division that divided the Metropolitanate of all Rus into parts. The southern part, with the Metropolitan of Kyiv in all Rus, in Vilnius or Novgorodok, recognized by the Patriarch of Constantinople, and the northern part, with the self-appointed, self-proclaimed Metropolitan of Kyiv and all Rus in Moscow, not recognized by the Patriarch of Constantinople. In Muscovy, they were well aware of this extremely unpleasant fact. For this reason, any doubt about the legitimacy of the Metropolitan of all Rus residing in Moscow was considered as heresy, prosecuted, and punished. It was one of the charges in the trial of Maximus the Greek in 1525, for example, when the defendant admitted that he doubted the legitimacy of the appointment of the Metropolitan of Moscow. He says, I was told that the Patriarch of Constantinople gave the Ruthenian Metropolitans the blessing document that they may be appointed by their own bishops of Rus. And I asked for this document several times and have not seen it yet. So yes, in 1525, secular and ecclesiastical powers in Moscow were well aware of the illegitimate status of their own metropolitan who lacked the blessing of the Patriarch of Constantinople and tried to cover this fact up by all means, even to the point of prosecuting anyone who dared to call it by the name. Even at that time, no document could be presented to prove the establishment of a separate Metropolitanate of Moscow or a permission to elect a metropolitan in Moscow. The documents examined clearly demonstrate that there did not exist two metropolitanates in the post-Florentine period, but the one Metropolitanate of all Rus, and just as it was before. There were two rival metropolitans claiming the same territories, which, however, they no longer tried and succeeded in asserting. In view of this fact, the question arises what changes took place in the Ruthenian Metropolitanate after the Union of Florence. You can see it. The first important change was the consolidation of the situation that had repeatedly occurred in the 14th and 15th century, namely the existence of two rival metropolitans in the north and in the south, with control over the territories corresponding to the sphere of political influence of their respective secular authorities. But there was also another change that can hardly be overestimated. In the 14th and the first half of the 15th century, the rightful Metropolitan of Kyiv and all Rus had his see in Moscow, while the monarchs of Poland and Lithuania tried to establish their independent ecclesiastical province or impose their metropolitan. After the arrival of Metropolitan Gregory, the sides changed for at least 120 years. The rightful, canonically appointed Metropolitan of all Rus, recognized by the Patriarch of Constantinople, had his see now in Poland, Lithuania, in Vilnius, or in Novgorod, while the self-appointed and unrecognized one in Moscow. This is associated with the biggest change, namely the return of the Metropolitan See of the Metropolitanate of all Rus from the north back to the south. What Metropolitan Maximus accomplished in 1299 with the transfer of the see from Kyiv to Vladimir on Klязьма, and Metropolitan Peter in 1325 transferring it to Moscow, has been reversed by the fact that the metropolitans residing in Poland and Lithuania were recognized, while those residing in Moscow self-proclaimed. Expressed in the ecclesiastical language of that time, in the latter case, we are dealing with a schismatic metropolitan, as the charter of 1467 by Patriarch Dionysius the first postulates. This document can be used to determine the date when the Metropolitan See returned to the south, as Metropolitan Gregory the Bulgarian was recognized and confirmed in his office of Metropolitan of Kyiv and all Rus, including the northern territories, while Jonah and his successors in Moscow were condemned and rejected. From 1467, the legitimate metropolitans of Kyiv were residing in the south, while the northern ones were schismatic. Thus, it is not a division, but a schism that we are dealing with. This is the precision that I wanted to make by this presentation. Another correction concerns the use of the term Metropolitanate of Moscow and the Metropolitan of Moscow. The use of both does not correspond to the canonical situation and the self-awareness of the incumbent of the 15th and 16th century, and aims at camouflaging the fact that the Metropolitan of Moscow was simply a counter-metropolitan of Rus, and not the head of a mythical Metropolitanate of Moscow, since such a Metropolitanate has never been established, either before or after the Union of Florence, and it has never been existing until the foundation of the Patriarchate of Moscow. It was still only a split-off part of the Metropolitanate of all Rus, with a self-proclaimed metropolitan. The use of the terms Metropolitan of Moscow and the Metropolitanate of Moscow for this northern part of the Kyiv Metropolitanate is anachronistic from the point of view of historiography and incorrect from the point of view of canon law, both then and now. This is precisely why Patriarch Theoleptos I had to step on his own neck, and despite the existence of the legitimate Metropolitan of Kyiv and all Rus in Poland, Lithuania, Joseph Soltan, refer to the schismatic Metropolitan Barla in Moscow as Metropolitan of Kyiv and all Rus in the inscriptio of his letter. The signing at the end of his letter is merely an attempt to circumscribe the usurper's area of power and limit his claims to it. Now the logical question arises, how should one correctly refer to the metropolitans residing in Moscow? The answer is by using their official title, namely the attribute Ruthenian or of all Rus. As for a noun, only the counter-metropolitan would be appropriate, since there was a canonical metropolitan of all Rus in Poland, Lithuania. In view of these observations, one more question needs to be answered. When did the final division between two parts of the Metropolitanate of all Rus occur, and when were the Moscow hierarchs' claims limited to the northern territory? Could the establishment of the Patriarchate of Moscow in 1589 be regarded as the time of such a final division of the Metropolitanate of all Rus? To answer this question, I would like to return to the above-mentioned insignia, the crozier of Metropolitan Peter, which was used at the investiture of the metropolitans in Moscow. At the enthronement of the first Patriarch of Moscow, he was given the same crozier of Metropolitan Peter as all previous hierarchs based in Moscow. The same crozier was given to all following Moscow Patriarchs up to and including the present Cyril at their enthronement. The associated claim to the entire territory of the former Metropolitanate of Kyiv and all Rus is obvious and has been repeatedly and directly emphasized and underlined. Therefore, it was only a matter of time when Moscow would attempt to incorporate the Metropolitanate of Kyiv and all Rus existed in Poland and Lithuania, which realized in the late 17th century. Moscow has never renounced its claims to the entire territory of the Metropolitanate of all Rus. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for demonstrating the great difficulties which arise when ecclesiastical boundaries are not congruent with political boundaries and when you have a kind of uneasy coexistence. And it's certainly very valuable to be reminded that the term Moscow in the title of the metropolitan there was not actually used by the incumbents themselves. If I understand correctly, in the 16th century, it only comes from foreign and unsympathetic sources, and that's certainly a very valuable point to establish. I'm now going to invite anyone in the congregation here who'd like to make a remark, raise a question, and so on, to put them to our two speakers. Actually, speakers, could you possibly come back up on the platform and face the... so, do we have a free microphone, or shall I just distribute this one? I'll come down and... Oh.
Stay where you should stay.
Okay, I'll stay up. Therefore, I invite anyone who would like to make a contribution to do so. I see a hand there, I think it's Constantine.
Yes, first, it seems to me. And
yeah.
Constantine is preparing his question.
I have only supplement to first lecture because in a chapter from 4015, I think you didn't use this chapter regarding the separation of the Kievan Metropolitan Archdiocese from the Moscow Metropolitan Archdiocese and the consecration of Gregory Sambalak as Metropolitan of Kiev. We read, and we are ourselves now hearing and seeing that the church is getting poorer and the Tsar and the Patriarch will not give a good builder for us and the church according to the canons we previously established by an ecumenical council, as it was in the past during the reign and the Grand Prince Iziaslav of Kiev, when the bishops gathered at the ecumenical council and established the Metropolitanate of Kiev and all Rus. That we found this grounded in the Rus Letopis, in Kiev Letopis, in the Vladimir Letopis, and in other. This is extremely interesting because this passage refers directly to the so-called Kievan Letopis under the year 6655, so 1147, and we read in this passage, the Bishop of Chernigov said, I know that it is allowed for a bishop when they gathered to establish a metropolitan. Onufre, the Bishop of Chernihiv, said, I know that we are allowed to establish a metropolitan because we have the head, I lose the passage. Because, yes, because we have the head of Saint Clement. After all, the Greeks established metropolitans by the hand of Saint John. And there is, and so after consultation, the bishop with the head of Saint Clement made claim the metropolitan. So only this small supplement.
Yeah. Should I say something only? This was exactly the point which is also referred to in the statement proclamation by Vytautas towards the Synod of Novogrudek, only that it is much more reduced. Yeah, It is only reduced to the fact that Iziaslav is mentioned and that this was the precedent. In fact, it remains the question whether this argument was indeed someone prepared by Vytautas or the bishops for him who was involved in this process, because the two versions I mentioned, the one of in Slavonic language and the one in Latin language, differ at the point how much the bishops were indeed part of the process before the actual election. All this is something we must discuss, and again also with regard to the letter piece, which also tell us about this in much more detail, of course. Yeah, I know this, and thank you so much for bringing it again.
Thank you. Oh, well, we have listened to two most remarkable communications, and of course I must congratulate Sebastian for the richness of documents that he produced, and Nazar for the perfect thesis that he built. Yeah, it's a remarkable construct that will no doubt be debated from now on. But my specific question is to Nazar, and it concerns, of all the events and dates that he mentioned, the one that he didn't mention. That is, and this is 1354. That is the date officially considered as the approval by the Patriarch of Constantinople of the transfer of the See of Kyiv to Moscow. And if this, you didn't provide your interpretation for this event, that's why I asked the question. Because if the traditional interpretation stands, then the designation of the Metropolitan, entre parentheses, of Moscow as Metropolitan of Kyiv is not a matter of self-awareness, but simply his official title. That is, if this interpretation stands, we have the most classical transfer of a see to a different location. And just as the Bishop of Sarai, for example, never was created by the ecclesiastical authorities, he existed simply because that's where the bishopric of Pereyaslav was transferred. You see, there are scores of such examples. So how do you interpret what happened in 1954 in Constantinople when Metropolitan Alexei, the first legitimate metropolitan out of Kyiv, outside Kyiv, was appointed?
Thank you, Professor Zuckerman, for this question. Nice try, but it didn't change the official title of the Metropolitanate. It was not the Metropolitanate of Moscow, which was founded by this fact, but it only was the it was allowed, or the fact was, it was giving blessing to the fact that the see was now moved from Kyiv to Moscow. But by this fact, no Metropolitanate of Moscow was created, nor has the bearer of this title become a new title. As in Constantinople, as well as in Ruthenian lands, they continued to use the title Metropolitan of all Rus or Metropolitan of Kyiv and all Rus, even after 1354. So it was only the blessing for the move of the transferring of the see, not the change of the not the separation, and not the change of the political province, of ecclesiastical province. I'm not. Yeah. A stamp of legitimacy for the transferring of the see, but since after the Union of Florence, after the election of Jonah, the bearer of the title was not recognized by the Patriarch of Constantinople anymore. It can't be seen as legitimate anymore. So you can't have legitimate see in Moscow and illegitimate bearer of this title there in Moscow. So from the canonical point of view, since the legitimate bill of the title is now in Poland, Lithuania, which was the fact after 1467 with Metropolitan Gregory the Bulgarian, the see comes back, so to say.
Thank you both for wonderful papers. I have a question to Sebastian. Thank you so much for this rich paper, and I think you're right with the date of 1415. I think this is a very important date. I come back to the Sakos. We have seen it many times in this conference. And now today, with your lecture, I realize that there is a text that goes around the figures, and I think it's a Confessio Fidei, and it says "Pistevo in Theon." If it starts from, and I think it's interesting that they have this passage in this Sakos, which is to be delivered in Moscow. And if you take into consider, it's like an irony in the whole discussion about union and if I remember correctly, Photios came from the metropolis of Monevasia. And I dare to suggest, I'm not an art historian, I haven't talked, but I thought about it. Monevasia was, I think, the richest metropolis under the Patriarchate. And if we take into consideration what you mentioned about the dire straits that people were facing in Constantinople, I cannot imagine that they could finance this luxurious garment. So my suggestion, or perhaps an idea, would have been that the money came from Monevasia, and not from, and also Manuel II was in Monevasia. So it could have been, let's say, the driving force behind the Sakos, but I haven't dealt with the garment, I haven't studied, just making some connections in these dots. Perhaps there is a Malvasia connection there. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. This is a point which is indeed a wonderful suggestion, because I think that Monevasia is indeed a very, very important see of the Patriarchate of Constantinople in that time, because it contributes financially, and it's not only in this case where an important figure of the ecclesiastical sphere comes from there. Let's take Isidore, who has also some connections to Monevasia, the Metropolitan of Monevasia, who plays an important role in decision-making at the Council of Florence. We have such a continuity that the southern Peloponnese is a territory of importance in ecclesiastical matters in late Byzantium. Absolutely clear, but it could be outlined. I think there is no article yet written on this, so it's a wonderful suggestion. And another short point concerning the Sakos and its probable way to Russia. I would suggest that one should take into consideration the mission which is mentioned 1415 to be first in Moscow and then coming to Lithuania and saying, well, do not hold to Vytautas, do not hold this synod at this moment because we have time. Perhaps it was a kind of a legation sent to Vasily, presenting also Photios with this very, very prestigious present, and at the same time trying to somehow manage the ecclesiastical problems, which afterwards escalate. So we unfortunately do not know the dynamics then from those splinters of evidence, and it could be a suggestion to link it. Yeah.
All right, well, but I see Jan, you have a question.
Yeah, first of all,
Have you got the mic? Yeah, you do. Okay.
So first of all, I would like to thank both of you for really extensive presentations, but I have two minors, like questions to Nazar, just to clarify some things. You started by mentioning that they used the title of a Metropolitan of all Rus, so that to emphasize this unification of the lands under the only rule of him, but then at the end you mentioned two titles used, of all Rus and Ruthenian. So the first question is, do you consider these two titles, Ruthenian, Metropolitan, and Metropolitan of all Rus, to be equal? And secondly, I would like just to clarify a bit, because you also mentioned in your conclusions that there was a question, right? So how should they address these contra-metropolitan, and obviously they should have addressed him by using an official title, but isn't it ironic? Probably I have missed something. How is it possible to address a contra-metropolitan by using an official legal title? So, thank you.
The first question was about well, it was the discovery of Andrei Pliguzov, who analyzed the titles of metropolitans of Kyiv, and he shown that until the 1347, actually there was only one title, the short one, Metropolitan of all Rus, which was officially in the Greek documents and the local documents. That's why the use of the same title after the Union of Florence by the metropolitans in Moscow showed that actually they used the old tradition before the long title was introduced. The other title, Ruthenian Metropolitan, is actually a self-description, which we also encounter in official documents. But rather in the documents of the Grand Duke of Moscow, when he describes the bearer of this title, he says Ruski Metropolit, Metropolit Ruski, and so on. So it's not the official title, but rather the description, which shows also the bearer. The second question, sorry. Yeah, well, we have the very similar situation in the Western Church with the Pope and anti-Pope, which have for themselves they claimed for themselves the same rights and the same territories. Well, if we don't hesitate to call the one of them Pope and the one anti-Pope, why can they apply the same logic to the title Metropolitan counter-metropolitan? So it was just a suggestion, it was not the ready answer, and I'm grateful if you continue this discussion and propose another titles.
No, it's better. It's a good chance to talk over these things.
Thank you. Once again for Sebastian, sorry, I just now remember what you mentioned about Sigismund and his discussion with Manuel II. And he said, if I understood it correctly, that he knows how to organize and bring into the realization a crusade, if I understand. Does that refer to his previous experience, which was not very successful because Nicopolis was not a successful crusade? Or does he mean that he knows the terrain, the area, the Balkan territory? This was just for clarification. Thank you.
Yeah, it is a phrase which says that Manuel indeed would be helpful for this coalition, which is formed among Sigismund on one hand and Poland on the other hand, as he is the only one present in the region, knowing the ways. So it's not a direct reference to Sigismund not having known the ways during Nicopolis, but perhaps he remembered just in this way that somehow others could be necessary to make more success. Yeah, I'm not quite sure about this.
I would like to supplement something to your discussion by drawing your attention that perhaps we should draw attention to the fact that the importance of that region of the Lower Danube River and of Lithuania itself was increasing in the grander schemes of contemplating and organizing crusades, because I think that the stalemate between Venice and Sigismund precluded, so to say, the vision of any successful operation seafaring across Mediterranean, and so to say that is why Vytautas' remark that it is quite near to go from Dnieper to Constantinople made much sense. And it was far easier, I guess, in such constellation when Venice was blocked, so to say, blocked anything what Sigismund was contemplating and was planning for quite a long time, so to say. This region, Black Sea region, was increasing in its importance in the crusading operations. If I may, so to say, I thank you both for your professional presentations, and I think that we will agree that Sebastian Kolditz made a very important corrections to the general picture, but I am not totally, it is not totally clear for me why do you add qualifier Ruthenian to the Bishop Theodosius of Polotsk. It is not clear for me.
Okay.
And
perhaps.
Okay, you can.
No. This perhaps I should correct. It might be a reference. So what do you think? The region of Polotsk not being called, or not should be called Ruthenia. Yeah?
No, for me it is important. How do you treat Theodosius?
Okay.
He was a Greek, so to say. It's a very interesting thing because he was promoted after the death of Cyprian by Vytautas, and he was a Greek person. And it seems to me that Vytautas was well aware, so to say, that it was a change, so to say. I do not know how to treat Cyprianus, but he was not a pure Greek, so to say. He was a Bulgarian. And it was such a successful, such a tacit understanding between in Constantinople and in Kyiv and Metropolitanate, when one is Greek Metropolitan, another is Ruthenian, one Greek and one Ruthenian, and this jigsaw situation was operative until the middle of the 15th century. Yes, I wanted just to add this clarification. Dear Nazar, I am not totally convinced about the weight and the force of conviction of your arguments advanced for the benefit of relativization of this crucial date of 1458, when, so to say, this division occurred according, and so to say, I think that the arguments put forward by Skocelas and Gill, they still are valid, even though, of course, it is difficulty with terms, with terminology, with terminological purism, as I could put it this way. But it seems to me that if we have two metropolitans in different political situations, so to say, I think that it is not totally absurd to speak about two metropolitanates. Perhaps you could expand how do you treat and how do you understand the difference between metropolitan and metropolitanate, if I could put this away. Another thing, I see the problems a little bit elsewhere. Ekaterina Mitsu had observed very acutely, I think, about Monemvagian connection, the possible connection to the Sakos, because it seems to me that Photius himself was hailing from Peloponnese. And Isidore is also most likely coming from Peloponnese, and this competitorial relationship between them is very interesting indeed, and it was operative, as we know from the sources themselves. And I see some problems elsewhere. I think that most of us will agree that it is critically important to understand the role of Metropolitan Photius, because we do not know exactly what role he played in this union movement, and it is, I think, very important. Another thing, what concerns the middle of the 15th century, for me it is very strange, and I do not find good explanation why, for example, Lithuanian Grand Duke and Polish King was, so to say, receptive to John of Moscow in 1451-53, when, so to say, they had any objections to the projection of jurisdictional power of Iona, even though even though Isidore was, so to say, canonically valid metropolitan. For me, such questions, and I do not know that, I'm sure that we are in no position to discuss them all through and through, but it seems to me that perhaps if there is a wish, so to say, after 2 years, perhaps we can make some seminar to discuss in a narrower circle such issues, if there are persons, if we have persons who might be interested in this topic. So because yes, I feel and I see that there are many questions that still have to be answered this way or another. Thank you.
Concerning 1458, the year of appointment of Gregory the Bulgarian, well, even after that, first of all, he was appointed as Metropolitan of Kyiv and also the northern territories, and there were 2 embassies to the Grand Duke of Moscow in order to achieve his consent to accept Gregory, and for this reason there were also 2 embassies to get the recognition of the Patriarch of Constantinople. The second was successful. So it continued the same situation which was before the Union of Florence. Then the same territory of the same ecclesiastical province was in 2 different states with the tries to establish their own metropolitan. And for this reason, I showed these 2 tables with the metropolitans before the Union of Florence and afterward, and after the Union of Florence, which shows actually the same situation, but now consolidated that no one of them could achieve the authority of the territory of his concurrent.
Thank you.
Fine. I think we can now almost bring things to a close, but before we thank our speakers, I see we have a question online from Marinos, which he wants to put to all the speakers and the audience, so everyone can pitch in if they have the right answer. It's what Marinos describes as simple maths formulated as a question, and he's focusing on the position of the Lithuanian Gediminids, the descendants of Gediminas, at the interface between the Catholic world and the Orthodox world. Question 1, how many male Gediminids do we know of who were baptized Orthodox? Question 2, how many Orthodox wives of Gediminids who were not Orthodox themselves, of course, how many of their wives do we know who did not have to convert because of the marriage, i.e. who remained Orthodox? So those are the 2 questions. How many male Gediminids were baptized Orthodox, and how many Orthodox wives of Gediminids who didn't have to convert because of the marriage to a Gediminid. I hope the questions are clear. We'll put them to the speakers first. Do you have any simple mathematical answers to these questions?
I think no one of historians have done any specific mathematic and count how many were baptized and how many. Well, there are known branches of the Gediminid family, yes, like the Olelkovich of Kyiv, which were Orthodox, and so on. And so there were really prominent representatives of the Gediminid family who had also claims to the throne of king and the Grand Duke. And because of this, there was also this try of 1480 by Olelkovich to get that throne. But no one exactly counted them. No. But yeah, the tendency, we can only the tendency that the Gediminids on the Ruthenian lands, on the ethnic Ruthenian lands, tended to be to take over the Orthodox faith or their subdue, while the Gediminids on the rather Lithuanian lands and rather tended to follow Jagiello.
Yes.
And concerning the wives of Gediminids, well, we also know that actually the change, the rebaptism, was only required in the case of king and not even the Grand Duke. I mean, when Alexander was Grand Duke, no one required that his wife should become a Catholic, but only as he was elected, or in perspective of his election to the King of Poland, this has become a real difficult question. So, and we know also other examples of the wives who were rebaptized only after becoming the wife, after their partner has become a king of Poland. So it was only the question for the monarch, not for the simple dukes, simple princes who did not raise the claims to the throne of the King of Poland.
Thank you. Well, I think that gives a pretty clear answer, and we'll probably can leave it at that. And I hope Marinos is happy with the answer. So let's now thank the speakers one more time, and then I think it's time.
Now we have coffee break, and according to schedule, we should